Need a last-minute cleaning product? Emergency birthday card? Or maybe an extra t-shirt for that cruise you're going on? Stop by Target to get what you need when you need it. Target has the best prices for the best deals. Right now, you can save 15% on your next purchase when you sign up for the Target's reward card. Expect more, pay less.
Hi, I'm Risudach, and today I will be discussing the Geneva Convention and its relevance today. First, I will be discussing the United States being a role model to other countries and the role it plays as one of the world powers. Also, I will be discussing the controversial actions taken by the government and the gray area that has allowed many high-ranking government officials to abuse the power given to them, including the delicate situation of what rights should and should not be given to captured terrorists, especially after the attack taken on the United States on 9/11. Next, Si-Heng Lee will be talking about how rebel groups fail to follow the Universal Code of Ethics agreed on by over 200 signatories. Following Si-Heng, Eric Sturrock will be discussing the need for a cyber edition of the Geneva Convention in a world where cyber warfare is so prominent. Lastly, Eden Martin will be talking about the actions that need to be taken to reform this out-of-date agreement and the multiple ways this could be handled. One of the most controversial questions of the Geneva Convention is whether or not the multiple agreements made during this gathering apply to captured terrorists. Many government officials hold the view that these rights don't apply to terrorists, especially under the Bush administration. However, it is very hard to state a universal law or code about the treatment of terrorists since there is no definite definition of terrorism. The Bush administration fought for the authorization of techniques to handle and interrogate prisoners that clearly break the rules of the Geneva Convention, such as prolonged exposure to extreme temperatures, long periods in stress positions, strapping prisoners to metal contraptions, and force feeding them. However, not all organizations feel the same way, and one of the most challenging struggles of this agreement is determining whether or not the captured person is a terrorist or just an innocent civilian. The United States has come under fire many times because of the use of torture interrogation techniques on people that end up being innocent civilians. The International Red Cross states captured combatants and civilians who find themselves under the authority of the adverse party are entitled to respect for their lives, their dignity, their personal rights, and their political, religious, and other convictions. They must be protected against all acts of violence and reprisal. They are entitled to exchange news with their family and receive aid. They must enjoy basic judicial guarantees. Also, since terrorists find themselves in a category where there are neither civilians nor soldiers, it is very hard to determine the rights that they should be given.
We know what is currently going on with the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, or ISIS for short. It is known to be an extremist group who rebels upon government in majorly the Middle East regions. ISIS is recognized as being brutal and inhumane to the innocents who usually deserves protection under the humanitarian laws or the Geneva Convention. However, ISIS is not the only rebel group creating such situations, and in fact, there are multiple groups acting like ISIS. In a report by the United Nations, Uphold International Humanitarian Laws, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has expressed his idea upon the conflict parties in Yemen. There reports to be an airstrike on the government building in a densely occupied area, resulting in 6 deaths. It is a blatant violation to the humanitarian laws and to the Geneva Conventions. According to the report, the Secretary General shows his attitude that all potential violations of international humanitarian law should be thoroughly investigated and those responsible for violations must be held accountable. Civilians must be protected whenever conflict happens. The United Nations is to be finding a peaceful solution to the conflict in Yemen since it has started in 2011. However, fighting continues and the ensuing humanitarian crisis has only deepened. It is easy to imagine the effect it does bring to the poorest country in its region. People will not only suffer from starvation and poverty, they need to face the invisible bullets and airstrikes as well. It has lasted for years and there's still a while away from getting peace for them. In the other article by The Independent, when it comes to protecting children in war zones, the United Kingdom should set an example by adding armed sales to Saudi Arabia. The author suggests that nations like the United Kingdom should be responsible for enforcing the humanitarian laws when it comes to protecting the children in the military conflicts. In the eastern Ghouta, an enclave controlled by rebellious forces, more than 400,000 civilians are there suffering from starvations and medieval sieges. It is horrible to people both inside and outside of it. Organizations such as Save the Children has strongly supported the enforcement of the humanitarian laws, even though the condition of the Eastern Ghouta is still depressing. Supposedly, the effectivity of the law is a function of the execution of the enforcement. The Geneva Convention never existed if no one needs to put respect on it.
Governments continue to invest in greater offensive capabilities, and cyberspace and nation-state attacks on civilians are on the rise. The world needs new international rules to protect the public from nation-state threats in cyberspace. The world needs a Cyber Geneva Convention. Cyber attacks might be broken down into two broad types. Attacks where the goal is to disable the target computer or knock it offline, or attacks where the goal is to get access to computer's data and perhaps gain admin privileges on it. The worst thing is that the people who get hurt from these cyber attacks are usually civilians. They can have their money taken and their computers rendered useless. An example of unregulated cyber attacks is Iran getting back at the US for pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. The Iranians can do whatever they want with little regulation. Thankfully, the US has a great cyber warfare group to protect us from the attacks. 2017's cyber attacks alone have caused $5 billion of damage, and cyber damage is supposed to reach $6 trillion annually by 2021. In the recent Winter Olympics, there was a cyber attack during the opening ceremonies. The attackers shut down the Pyeongchang 2018 website and prevented spectators from printing out reservations and attending the ceremony, which resulted in an unusually high number of empty seats. As shown, cyber warfare is a very prominent issue that needs to be addressed before the next big war comes.
In each segment of this podcast, we have covered the many aspects of the Geneva Conventions and its effects on the world. We've covered how the U.S. has not abided by the agreements, rebel groups such as ISIS not abiding by the terms as well, and Cyber Geneva Conventions and whether it would be beneficial to hold another one. If this were to happen, what could be done to update these antiquated terms? There are a few steps that we can take to reform these outdated policies as well as the lack of adherence to these agreed terms. Firstly, the UN should provide leadership to bring together the relevant parties and discuss, update, and renew their commitments. Secondly, as a part of the agreement, clear penalties for countries and groups that do not follow or break these agreements. A more palatable solution is to hold many smaller conventions that focus on specific issues and reduce the chances that the original conventions would unravel. All of these paint colors aren't what I'm looking for. They're too
boring, lackluster, unoriginal. Here at Home Depot, we have the best paint selections and the cheapest prices. Get a gallon of any color of Benjamin Moore and get another one 50% off.
awesome.
More savings, more doing.